Hey everyone, welcome to the February edition of the EMEA APAC office hours. I believe this is our second EMEA APAC office hours ever, so this is really exciting. So we appreciate everyone's support and everyone's attendance and the Analytics Champions for showing up from around the world. So I'm going to start with an introduction. My name is Sherry Deutsch. I work for US Bank. I lead a team of experimentation strategists. And while I'm normally from New Jersey, I'm in Paris right now. Mandy, to you.
Thanks. My name is Mandy George. I'm a senior digital analyst at Best Buy Canada. I'm currently in St. John's, Newfoundland, which, fun fact, is the easternmost point of all of North America. And it's my second year in the Adobe Champions group. I'm excited to be here. Pass it off to Leo.
Hello. So this is Leo Lau. I'm from Hong Kong. I work for the Manulife, the insurer. So they have a presence in North America and also in Asia. So currently I'm based in Asia. It is also my second year as the Adobe Analytics Champions, and I have been using the Adobe Analytics for 12 years. So I think happy to be here and then to share some of the knowledge. And then next one, Anna.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Ioana Maftei. This is my first year as an Adobe Analytics Champion. I currently work for IBM Consulting. I'm a senior analytics manager. I also lead a team of insights and analytics specialists, and I've been working with Adobe Analytics for around 6 years now. But yeah, I'm very excited to start taking part of these sessions as well. And I'll pass it on to Anu.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. This is Anu Abraham. I'm from India. I'm working for Publicity. I'm part of the data analytics team here. So this is my first year as the champion, and very excited to be here. Thank you. Over to you, Mandy.
All right, I will share our dashboard. Sorry, give me a second. There we go. All right, so we have a bunch of pre-submitted questions, but if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat at any time.
All right, we'll start with our first question, which is to explain more about EVARs and props. I'm not sure who put the notes in there. If you guys want to go ahead.
I put the notes, but feel free to go ahead.
Okay. All right. So the difference between EVARs and props is that EVARs persist. So they're characteristics that you want to know about a user regardless of where they are in your site. So you want to know if it's their first visit or not, if maybe their entry page, their device type, their location, things like that. Props only fire on the individual page and they do not persist. They're really great for pathing. So if you want to know if a user went from page to page to page, you can use a prop because it won't persist. It's a good way to build a funnel.
Yeah, and I also update a little bit on this description also for the pops. All of the pops can be configured as a list pop that for the EVAR, you cannot do so. For the list pop, which means in general, when you are storing data into a EVAR or a POPs, you store one single value. So like what we see in the screen now, like the internal search term 47, 43, something like that. In general, we only send one value, but for the list pod, we can send in some concatenated values. So it can be in one single hit, we send multiple value into this pod that the internal search term 47 and 43 in one go, and then it will be automatically break down and then showing up as individual item. But for the pop, we need to know that it has a shorter limit of the character we can store. It can only up to 100 bytes of data. So for simple English character, no problem. But for like me from Asia, a lot of characters, they may be double bytes or triple bytes. It will be eat up quite a lot of space. And then unlike EWA, it can be 255 bytes of data. It can be way longer in storing the data. And then also one more interesting thing for the EWA is you see on the first table that for basically for all EWAs, they come with a instant metrics that you don't need to do it by yourself. Basically, every time one value sent into Adobe Analytics as a EWA, it will be counted as a instant. So you can think it is similar to POPs because POPs do not persist and then it will keep POPs do not persist, it will count as is, but EWA will be persisted and then it may be have some following attributions to many other metrics that you will lost track. Okay, how many times certain value actually being sent into Adobe Analytics as a EWA, then we can use this built-in instant metrics to understand how many times each individual value has been sent into the EWA.
Yeah. Building tables like this is sort of my go-to way to explain the difference between props and EVARs when I onboard new analysts. Search terms is my favorite way to explain it. So in the table on the left here, we've got a search term that's captured in an EVAR. And then on the right, we have a search term that's being captured in a prop. And so you can see that, like Leo said, the EVAR has the instances. But when it comes to actual searches, the data is the same. But when it comes to orders downstream, the EVAR persists into the online orders, whereas the prop does not persist. So if you try and attribute a conversion further down the funnel to a prop earlier in the visit, you won't get anything there.
That is a fabulous explanation. I'm going to use that.
Yeah, search terms is my favorite way to explain it because it's pretty easy to understand, I find. There's a question in the chat: are props going to be discontinued in the future? I know in CJA they don't use props or EVARs. It's just all one dimension type. I don't actually have CJA at my organization. I don't know if anybody here does.
No, but in CJA, they basically give up this concept. And even in the Adobe Analytics itself, Adobe is now really recommending to use EWAs only. So they are not really sunsetting the POPs in Adobe Analytics, but it is just no longer recommended because a lot of the all-day feature only available on POPs are also now available on EWAs to make it easy to set up the Adobe Analytics repository configuration, more standardized approach.
Yeah, especially since they introduced the ability to do custom attributions. So when you have metrics in your table, you can select this use non-default attribution model. So if you have something that's an EVAR and you want to make it act like a prop, there is same touch. So if I apply same touch to internal searches in my EVAR table, it will same touch. It should. Oh, sorry, the search happens. Sorry, I meant to do it with orders. The search will stay the same, but if I do it with the orders, change that to same touch, then it makes it act kind of like a prop because it's giving that same touch attribution in sort of the same way that you can change attribution when you're using it against a prop. And you can do something like participation, which does give 100% credit to every dimension value. So the totals will be overstated, but you can use like a custom attribution, change it to participation, and that will give you downstream effects for your search terms. But again, it does overcount these items a little bit because every value gets credit. So with a regular last touch, if they search, search term 47 and then term 43, for a last touch, only 43 would get the credit. But for a participation metric, both 47 and 43 would get credit for the event.
Yeah, and just adding one more thing, you can also like change the expiration of an event on a hit basis with the variable settings under report suite settings. And also, it is worth it note that you might be able to like break down an event with other props or events. But in case of a prop, it is required that the other prop that you want to break down should also be in the same hit, meaning it should happen that all this data, all these props that if at all you want to like break down that in the workspace, that should be sent to Adobe at the same in the same hit or in the same server call.
All right, want to move on to the next question?
Yeah. All right.
What's the best way to build segments to overlap in searches with multiple workflows?
Yeah, Venn diagrams are useful when you've got sort of two or more groups of traffic and you want to see if they overlap. In terms of, if I understand this correctly, overlap in searches. So I think that'd be like multiple searches in the same visit. If there's like a particular search that you're interested in, you could always make that in a visit level segment and then break that down by search term to see what else happened in the same visit.
I use Venn diagrams a lot in experimentation because we want to make sure that A and B do not overlap, which unfortunately happens on occasion. So I would think that, yeah, you would want to build the segments and then figure it out. And then one of the great things I love about a Venn diagram is to show the data, because then you can really take a good look at the table with it. That would be my recommendation. And one thing I notice now is if you pull in multiple dimensions from the sidebar, it actually creates the segments for you.
Yeah, and we have a limit of 3 segments and 1 metric.
Which is frustrating.
Now, this is not a good example because in here, the segments are also cookie-based. So phone, desktop, they are all mutually exclusive. So maybe we can use some example for the referrer type or referring domain, and then or the first referrer domain type of thing, to understand whether the people are coming from different sources, and then whether they are like they first come through the search sources, and then they will also come back from some sort of social sources or some different sources for the comparison, and then to see whether there are some overlapping of the people.
So, oh, hang on. Now I wanted to bring these
one by one.
Yeah. So I will call out, this is all sample data. So sometimes it doesn't look like normal data. So it doesn't look like there's actually any overlap in these as well. Let me do search.
Can you pull out the table just to show what it looks like?
Oh yeah, I'll do it. Let me just do this with maybe we'll get some overlap with search terms.
And Mandy, for those segments, you may need to change the container from hit to visitor. It is also a tricky thing to build the Venn diagram. The default segment is hit, so you also some sort of a mutual exclusive situation.
I don't have an option to update the segment there, so I think I have to actually.
Yeah, maybe we need to save it first.
Yeah. Okay, but generally, this is what a Venn diagram looks like. My favorite part is the fact that it does this.
And I see Megan's questions. What does it mean when circles overlap? And when they don't overlap, as you can see that there is, oh, look, there's one that hits both. And you can see the right 4 columns tell how many are in each of the segments together and how many are in hit all 3 segments. Normally you might see them overlapping, and they're also relative size to audience. So these audiences are roughly the same size, but sometimes you'll see really big circles, really small ones, and that's also helpful too. It can be a good visual for stakeholders because we all respond to pictures better than we do to words.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I want to move on to the next question.
So how to go beyond follow report, as different items can affect member drop at certain stages of the journey. How to track when visitors go step or 2 back and then continue in the process if they take a few days between steps. So this one here, the followed is interesting because, you know, you can kind of do whatever journey you want, but it is a preset journey. The flow visualization, on the other hand, I find is sometimes a little bit better if you're trying to figure out what the customer journey is. So rather than, you know, predefining a path, you can pick what you're interested in. So in this case, I'll pick the home page. And you have, you know, advanced settings. I'm going to put it to the max number of columns, change it to visit, and build. So this here shows all the places that people go, you know, before or after whatever value you specify. And you can hit the pluses at either side to keep adding columns. The more you add, the longer it'll take to load. But basically you can go, I'm actually not sure if there's a limit.
I never hit the limit, but it hit my patience to wait for the result.
Yeah. Yeah, so you can follow the paths, and like if you hover over, it'll highlight it. So you can see sort of where they went. So in a case like this, some people went to home, search results, and then back to the home page. So this would be like them going back a step or 2, and then you can see from there, where do they continue on afterwards.
I think that's a great example. I hate the flow personally. My head looks like a giant octopus to me. But my flows tend to be a little bit more specific when you're dealing with a bank. Thanks, Mandy.
Yeah.
Move on to the next question.
Leo, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, of course. So the low traffic, basically it got quite a lot of questions all the time. The same amount of questions like the unspecified, because it may be quite funny thing we so far, well, if you use Google Analytics, you won't see it, but only in the Adobe Analytics, because this is something they want to make sure the workspace dashboard displayed in a timely fashion that you can see the data in maybe a couple of seconds instead of a long waiting time. So in case if there are some dimension, you got a lot of unique value. So like page name, you may only have hundreds or thousands of pages on your website. But if you are tracking some information like the IP address, not an ideal example, but if you track the IP address, you got a lot of people going to your website, you may got 100 of thousands or even millions of different unique value recorded in Adobe Analytics. And then when the Adobe try to display any visualizations in here, it cannot go down to the whole list, and then it will take quite a long time to render. So they have some threshold that to bucket those unique value into some low traffic bucket that to display them as one item. So you see that now it is some sort of 500,000 or 1 million unique value. And I just saw a product release update that they are raising this limit in some 2 or 3 months time. If I remember correctly, they are going to double that amount. So in case you have a dimensions with 1 million of unique value, then maybe the lowest 10,000 of them will be bucketed into a low traffic dimension item when you do the Adobe Analytics dashboard. But it is only impacting the dashboard. So if you use the data warehouse function, or if you use the data feed function to export the data, actually you are still able to get all those 1 million or 2 million unique value, because by that time you are getting the raw data into your own environment to do your own reporting or data migrate data massage or whatever reason, and that it is not impacting the workspace UI. So you can get those values. So those values, all of them will be recorded, but just because of the performance consideration, long list of unique value in the dimension will be bucketed. And then also one of my thinking about this long list of unique value is when we do Adobe Analytics using the workspace creating dashboard, usually we are trying to produce some aggregated data instead of a long list of data, because as you use the Adobe Analytics workspace UI, you understand that for each dimension, you can show at most 400 items, and then you cannot show more than that. So a long list of unique value sometimes may not be some data we want to capture, but of course it depends on your business requirement.
Yeah, also just adding in, say if it reaches the particular threshold and say if you have new values coming in, then they'll all go to traffic. But then as and when one of those or any of those values would get, say, double digits instances in a single day, then Adobe would move them as a separate dimension line item. So you would actually see them as a line item in your dimension report. And I think we can also request for to change the threshold by contacting customer care. We just need to mention which variable for which we need to change the default thresholds.
I think you're on mute, Shari.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I'm setting up my screen. We lost Mandy. So if you're ready to move on to the next question. The question is options for exporting and archiving historical data.
Yeah, maybe I also take on this one first. So I actually briefly mentioned the data warehouse and data feed. So data feed is kind of my love with Adobe Analytics data, because it is really the raw data Adobe collected when we are doing all the tracking implementation, sending over to Adobe for recording. And then we can use the data feed function to export all the data Adobe collected and then send to some FTP or Azure, or they are adding more and more destination for the archiving purpose. And then, of course, we can use it for many other purposes as well. So they are raw, and then they are a little bit difficult to understand because they don't have all the visitor calculations. They got thousands of different columns in the data feed, and then about 10 different markup lookup table to support those data. And then also the data feed file can be huge. Of course, it depends on your website. You can have easily a few hundred megabytes of data per day for your website, one single website. And data warehouse is another easier approach that you can use to do. I usually call it as a CSV export, that you can similarly doing something like building the freeform table in the workspace, but in a different UI. And then it allows you to select multiple dimension, multiple metrics, and then to schedule the data sending out to some destination, email or FTP, for some smaller volume data of exporting and archive. An individual table or dashboard is some simple manual approach that you just right click on the freeform table, and then you can copy, you can export to get the data. But in here, when we are thinking about the archiving historical data, we need to aware that Adobe do not store our data forever. It depends on your contract. That if I remember correctly, most of the contract, the default retention period should be 25 months. And then since the GDPR, Adobe are really on a rolling manner to try and keep any data beyond this retention period. So if you want to do the archive, you need to start early, and then to make sure you got all the data archived, or else those data beyond the retention window, they will be gone forever. And then even Adobe, they basically will not able to give us back those data beyond the retention window. We can pay to store more, but usually I think better to do some sort of archive internally rather than rely on Adobe to store data for 3 years, 4 years, or even longer. Better to store internally.
Yeah, I just to add on to that, I have an example of a client where we don't have a data warehouse or data feed. So it's just a manual job of making sure we have previous year's data saved up, at least, the main KPIs on a yearly, monthly, weekly basis. It's very, unfortunate, but it still helps us have a historical comparison for previous years. So we do it that way.
Is there a general recommendation for exporting and archiving? Is there something that you would recommend to each of the champions as a period of time to keep data, assuming it's not required by law?
I think my recommendation is really make use of the data feed to store data onto some now quite low cost online storage, like on the Microsoft Azure, the block storage, storing multiple terabyte of data is still some very low cost. And then it is really the totality of all data has been recorded. And then maybe 3 years later, 4 years later, you're still able to reproduce any type of analytics or insights you can do as of today. Yeah, of course, when I think about this, how often we may want to use it, it may not be very often we want to look back for 5 years ago, what is the website traffic, may not be very likely, but I think it's still good to do this type of housekeeping, given it is a low cost approach, and then Adobe are not going to charge us anything to export all the raw data, then why don't we do that?
Yeah, man, remember when storage used to cost a lot of money? Yeah,
Storage is cheap now. Storage is so cheap now.
Amazingly cheap now. So we're looking for an explanation of predefined and custom alerts in Adobe Analytics.
Anyone using the alert? Honestly speaking, I do not use it.
I'm using the alerts. I would say there are some very good kind of anomaly detection algorithms they have, and they use, kind of data science. You can use different percentages you can apply to identify the anomaly. It can be on an hourly basis, on a daily basis. I would say use them carefully, because if you use them too often, so you have an hourly alert set up within Adobe, and you have, the hours throughout the day, the traffic can be very different. So it might not be relevant that at 5 a.m. you had low traffic and the next hour you had way more. But they are quite smart, and they take into account the data for a longer period of time to identify those. It's probably not the best explanation possible. What I would say is make sure you set up alerts for like your main KPIs that can be affected either by technical issues or, some paid marketing channel that has dropped. For us, it's been very helpful, and it saved us identifying technical issues before customers did. That's the threshold system that I was mentioning, but maybe someone else can explain it better than me.
I use alerts in experimentation because, again, we work for a bank and we want to ensure that none of our experiments are impacting certain things. We use them for guardrail metrics like logins. And we want to ensure that if a user's falling into our new experience, that it's not impacting their ability to log in and access their money or any other key factors. And so they're helpful to us. And sometimes we will put them on hourly because that's something we want to know immediately. If users can't log in, that pretty much is the whole purpose of our website. So we have anomaly detection for that. We use anomaly detection for errors as well. So we want to make sure that, again, the number one rule of experimentation is not to interrupt the user experience. So that's how I use errors and the custom alerts.
Yeah.
One of the
things.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say, it seems we can integrate alerts with Slack or Teams. I haven't done this, but I got to know about this from Jen. So it might be a good, instead of setting up this in emails, which people might not always look into, but if you have a Teams channel or if you have a setup in Slack, then probably the people who might actually want to look at that might not miss that, and they'll eventually look into that. Yeah, just want to share.
Yeah, just to add, we actually did integrate it with Slack, and it's really helpful to be able to see it in real time. One of the other benefits of integrating it with a Slack or a Teams channel is that it isn't dependent upon a specific person. So if you have the alert set up to go to, for example, yourself as an example, but then you leave the company, there could be nobody else checking that alert. Whereas if you have it set up to go to a team Slack channel, then it isn't dependent on just one person. And my computer cut out for a little bit. I've rejoined on my phone, so I did miss a little bit. But I came back in when you were talking about setting up the alerts, but sometimes it'll fire at weird times around 5 a.m., depending on how your traffic level fluctuates. One of the things that we did was we actually made a segment that excludes those times, and we paired it with a metric. So what we did was we set up saying, if time is between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m., then it produces sort of like an average value that we know will never trigger the alert. And then if it's outside 10 p.m. to 4 a.m., it fires the actual value. So that reduces a lot of false positives that we would have previously gotten overnight or in other periods when traffic isn't typical.
That's a great idea. And unfortunately, I'm not getting much because it is sample data to show.
That's a good shout. What we've tried to do is look at percentages or percentage of visits with errors, for example. But sometimes I know that the segments we've created are acting a bit funny when you set them up here, like the setup is a bit limited. So instead of saying, you got 5% of visits with errors, it gives you some really weird percentages in the email alert, but it's still valuable to check when you get one of those.
I tend to use the changes by percent, since we have a threshold of how much of a difference that we're willing to accept between our two experiences. So there are a lot of different options that you can do to decide how you want your alert measured. Anomaly is great, but there may be other uses as well. Move on to the next question is, what are the automatically tracked basic metrics in Adobe Analytics, like page views?
Yeah, so I guess this is like the out of the box metrics that they'd be asking about. So yeah, Adobe does have sort of a number of metrics that they capture automatically. So page views, visitor, those are all default metrics. There is also like the purchase related one. So they have, I think it's cart ad, checkout, and orders. I'm trying to remember what the other ones are off the top of my head. But the one thing I will say is if you look at the items in the left-hand menu, there is a little icon beside them for the ones that are Adobe defaults. That's one thing that can really be helpful is all those little icons. If it's an Adobe default one, I think does it have the little Adobe symbol? And if it's a calculated metric, it has like a little calculator beside it, and so on. So that's something that can help you determine if it's custom or default.
And the metric here has a little A as well. Whatever that is. Yeah, I looked quickly for a list, but I didn't see one online. Let's talk about best practices for integrating Adobe Analytics data with website and app, between your website and app.
Yeah, so I'll take that one. Just briefly outline a few milestones or steps, and then which are the ones that you can, the best practices that you need to keep in mind. So it all starts right at the time of requirement gathering. So depending upon whether this is a new site that is getting launched, or if it is just a microsite that is getting, added to something that is already existing. So we need connect with the relevant stakeholders and be part of the important meetings in the in the beginning itself, if that is possible. Then have them documented in the BRD, and also it is important in not the specific domain or industry that we're working with. So the goals or the KPIs would vary depending on that. Say, for instance, the banking domain, a specific website or app may have very different KPIs compared to a normal retail one. So One more thing to note that is, though we get a set of requirements, it is it would be nice if we also come up with our set of ones. Based on your expertise, or say the experience working with previous teams or projects, or with the same team, we would understand that though they may not ask for this initially, but there's a chance that the stakeholders might come for a specific data point at a later point in time, though it was not asked initially. So that is something to keep in mind. And another one is about error tracking. So it may not be getting documented in initially, but then again, what we need to keep in mind is, if at all something goes wrong and say something is broken, then how can we find out that from our reports? So that way we'll be able to identify what all we need to capture, and we'll be able to even if that is not part of the initial documentation, but we can still keep that in mind, and while implementing, we can include them as well. Another thing, after finalizing the requirements and defining the goals and KPIs and having the SDRs and everything, then the next step would be about the tagging strategy itself. So we can think about what kind of implementation that we're going to use. Are we going to use SDKs, or any other sort of implementation that we're going to have? And also, it is better to understand the ecosystem that we have. So, for instance, one of the projects I had, so we had pages from AEM and also from SAP Hybris. So while defining the data layer, so we had to make sure that the changes were done in both the set of codes, because at times we would request for a specific change, but then that would only be done in some of the pages, and some of the other pages would actually miss that data. So if we have such interconnection between systems, we need to make sure that these systems actually talk to each other, and we get the data in terms of if it is data layer. And then also the data layer implementation. Everyone these days would follow the event-driven data layer. So this kind of discussions should happen initially, and then at times we would be, as analytics developers or implementation specialists, we would also be expected to give them the payloads or the JSON format in which that is to be done. So yeah, and next thing is about the standardized naming conventions. So at the time of configuring the variables in the repository itself, it is a better way. Say probably sometimes you might have the same variable in a prop and also an UR, and then while you're actually working on the workspace, sometimes it may be difficult to if you use the prop or the EUR. So it is better to have that kind of notations to identify the variables, and also even while defining launch rules, if you have a set of rules corresponding to a certain set of requirement, probably denote that with a common identifier, so that it'll be easier for us to revisit that later. And coming to the implementation part of it, there are many extensions even provided by Adobe and also by third parties. So we can leverage them whenever possible, if we get if it makes our work simple, and also to create necessary data elements. So instead of referring to the JavaScript path again and again in code, if it is done in a data element, then we can refer to that data element, and it would make the code much simpler. And again, we need to be very cautious about when making the report suite settings. And the other steps would be setting the processing rules, marketing channel rules. So say some of the data points we may not get it at the time of the particular event happening on, at the page load, but we'd be doing them afterwards, after data collection. So that be done using processing rules or marketing channels, and in case if you have a classification role, say for campaign or products, in that case, we should be noting that as well. And then another one would be port rules. So Adobe themselves has a set of port rules. So these are the things that we can keep in mind. And another one is about the data governance and compliance. So we need to ensure that we're not collecting any BAA data without the user's consent, and also that if we have CCM in place, that we're tracking the user only based on whether they've given consent for analytics. And there is also a provision to label Adobe Analytics variables with their respective data policy labels. So that is available in this path, admin, all admin, data configuration, collection, and data governance. So we can use this path to specifically configure the data policy labels for any of the components. And coming to testing, we can leverage extensions like AAP debugger or things of that sort, or if you have an automated version of to track all the page load server calls and then identify which are the variables that are getting fired, anything of that sort, like integrating with Python or something, that would be great. Otherwise, we'd need to keep in mind that if we have, say, a lot of pages, but we're having, a static or a few templates associated with that, and in that case, may not need to check all the pages, but instead we can probably try and pick few pages from all those templates and then do the testing. And another one is about creating templates and components like segments and calculator metrics for other users. So that all of them don't have to create that on their own, especially if that is that is to be made commonly available. So as and when we, if it is a separate team that is analyzing the data when we hand it over to them, it is better that this set of commonly used resources can be created once, and then that is set up, that is shared with the respective users. And another one was about alerts. So we've already mentioned that. And then about regular audits and maintenance. So it is always better that we have regular periodic audits that has been agreed with the other stakeholders, and it would also help us to identify any opportunities for any optimization. And one thing that we can do is implementing the analytics health dashboard. So that would just give us the overview of all the parameters that we're tracking. In a single glance, we'll be able to see which are the ones that are performing better, and if you're missing the data, or if you're getting the data less compared to the previous periods, then it'd be much easier to find it from the health dashboard. Otherwise, you would personally need to depending on the number of variables, create a specific workspace report just with all these variables, but that would be a bit difficult if you have more variables. But if it's just minimal variables in your organization, then you can also probably think about having a separate workspace report just to see that all these variables are getting populated as expected. That some changes in the code base has not actually broken their analytics tracking. So I've personally found the analytics health dashboard to be much helpful. And another one is about training and documentation. So for the developers and also for the analysts, it is good that we share the best practices and also relevant resources with them. So people don't have to unnecessarily create reports that are already there, or create segments that are already there, and this kind of segments or other resources appearing multiple times, which might actually be for the same purpose. And as we all know, it's a continuous improvement. We always have a scope for improvement, so we can monitor and analyze the data to identify any trends or patterns, and even areas for improvement. And then probably if you have Adobe Target, then you can probably roll out an A/B test to see if the area for improvement that you've identified is actually working or not. So Yeah, I've just basically touched on a few important points, but yeah.
Thank you, Anu, for that detailed explanation. I'm going to move to a question right now that came in from the chat, which is asking for advice around setting expiration for marketing channels. Best practices, should we just use the default 30-day window? Appreciate if this is part of business requirements. Any thoughts would be much appreciated. Thoughts on marketing channels?
I can start, I guess. I wouldn't know what to recommend in terms of best practices for marketing channels. I guess it really depends on, collaborating with the marketing team and understand what they need from their campaigns, how they measure things, what they expect to happen from a campaign, and how long you should be measuring specific channels or specific tracking codes. What I would say is you can always, start from this and see if it meets your needs. There are things like cookies that can impact that as well. If you can't have a returning users tracking them because they clear out cookies, or because you have a lot of them rejecting that, I would consider that as well, your kind of percentage of returning users, and if you can identify them coming through different channels. But I personally use the 30 days window. I don't know if anyone else has a different setup and would like to give a bit of insight.
For ours, we use the 30-day as well.
I think sometimes, from what I've seen at least, when we have a campaign review, they expect sometimes to have traffic coming from something for a longer period of time, and they can mention that that traffic should be attributed for, I don't know, a month, or they would expect, depending on your main KPIs, leads, sales, to come out of something. So I think it's best to work with that and with what they're trying to achieve. But yeah, 30 days seems like a reasonable amount of time.
I mean, one of the other things too is, like, you do have the option to do the custom attributions in Workspace. So like I showed when we were talking about props and evars, if you want to change the allocation from last touch to first touch, and change your look back from 30-day to 60-day, that is something you can do with the non-default attribution models as well. So you do still have some flexibility.
Awesome, thank you, Mandy. Go back to our list of questions here. Looking for steps for implementing Adobe Analytics on a website and mobile app for best practice.
Yeah, so I put down the steps that I usually use. So I won't say it is a best practice, but I think it's quite high level and generically true for most of the tracking implementations. So the first thing is really review the website or apps we want to track, because at the end of the day, we are measuring the customer interactions on those digital property. We want to identify the customer journey. We may need to have some sort of a Figma design from the design team or from the product owner to let us know, to understand what those journey will be, so then we can, from reviewing those journey, to identify what is the trigger point to trigger some tracking, what kind of data points we want to capture, basically those dimension data, and then the events, what numbers we want to capture. And then the most important thing is the documentations of these traffic tracking specification, and then to map those data and event to the Adobe Analytics dimension and metrics. Because for a website or for any kind of tracking, it can go crazy or messy if we don't have a good documentation to document all those trigger dimensions and events to be captured. And then on to the actual implementation, it really depends on the technology being used. So we may use the ad measurement, we may use the web SDK, mobile SDK, and or adopt the new or upcoming or the trends of the event-driven data layer that is less depends on the DOM event or any hard coding or the direct call rule for the developer to implement, that they can just simply push some sort of JSON data according to the tracking specifications to the event-driven data layer, and then we can implement those rules in the Adobe launch to capture those data and send to Adobe Analytics. And then when we do the implementation, the verification is the another important thing we need to do. And then we are not rely on the final result. We really need to do the verification live using the Adobe Assurance. It is a new tool that I like it very much. It can do the live monitoring on what kind of data sending out, not only for the mobile app, but also for the website using the web SDK. And of course, we can use some more traditional approach using the browser extension. I personally use the OmniBug more than the Adobe browser plugin itself, because I think that plugin, maybe the OmniBug is more to my taste, just simply. And then we can monitor what kind of data sending out in real time, that when we click a button, whether this event or that EWA are sending out in the hit. And then at the end, after we test out all these individual live tracking, we still need to have some sort of validation dashboard created in the Adobe Analytics. It may not be created to answer any business questions, but it just used to do some sort of a showcase to the business user or to the product owner that, okay, we had all these data point or event defined in the tracking specification, and then we are able to see those data in the Adobe Analytics UI, that they can feel okay, comfortable, that then we can make use of those data to create some new dashboard that answering the business questions. Yeah, this is my usual steps for the implementation.
Thank you, Leo. Appreciate that. So we are at time. So I want to thank everyone from attending your afternoon, your evening. Analytics Champions, thank you so much for being here and sharing your knowledge, having the opportunity to share mine. And please check back. We'll have more information on the next event, and we'll post this to YouTube momentarily. So thank you all very much.
Thank you for joining, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.